Everyone, this is Af here, and I am wanting to present a very introductory sort of video screen recording of SPSS, and as I said, very brief but introductory sort of walkthrough of what SPS is. What's the difference between this window, and how do you input data, and all that kind of thing. So really just the basics of how to get started with SPSS. So let's get straight into it. So when you open SPSS and you click on starting a new data file, you'll see that two windows pop up. You've got this window at the front, which is called your data window, and then you've got another one at the back, which here is labeled output 1, and this is an output window. Syntax we will dive into a bit later on, but for the moment, all you have to think about, all you have to worry about are these two main windows. So the data window, as the name implies, is where you input your data. And there are two different views down the bottom here. You've got your variable view and you've got your data view. You start with the variable view because you need to put in some variables. So this is where you've done some experiment or you've collected some kind of data, and you need to tell SPSS a bunch of different things. And these are listed at the top of each of these columns. So you have to tell it the name, the type of data. There's a few things you don't really have to worry about, such as width. If there are decimal places, you can tell it if they're, to how many decimal places you would like that data to go to. The label, if it, and I'll get into variables a bit later on, but if it has specific values for different variables, you can put them in there. If there are any missing values that you would like to highlight, you can put that in there. There's some other things here, but probably the most salient one that you need to think about is the measure. So let's just jump straight into it and let's put in a variable. I've just got some example data here. Let's just say I'm going to put in an age. This is completely fictitious data that I just made up. So if we're going to put in age, I'm going to give it the name age. The type of variable, when you click into the next column, it will automatically populate it with just some standard inputs. And usually they're quite good, but you might need to make a few changes here and there. The type of data, if you click on these little three dots, it will give you a list of the different things that you can put in. Generally speaking, numeric is the one that you always want to go for. If you are in finance, you might need to deal with dollars and that kind of thing. I'm not too sure, but really numeric is the only one. The only one that I would highlight here is string. String is really handy if you have sort of unauthorized characters in your data. What do I mean by that? Well, you'll see here that one of my bits of data is say the ID of the participant that took this test, for instance. And you'll see that the participant is 2020_1. Now it's really common for particularly IDs or other bits of data to have underscores or to have maybe some kind of special character in there. And when you try and put that into SPSS, it will freak out. It won't like it at all. So what you got to do is you got to actually tell it that it's a string variable, and then it will relax and it actually won't it will just treat it like an ID, like a placeholder. It won't actually treat it like a proper bit of data variable. So that's just the only one that I'd really point out there. But in this case, it's just numeric, so we're going to go OK. The width is the width of the column in the data view, so we don't really need to worry about that. The decimal, well, we're going to put it to 0 because it's an age, it's a whole number, it doesn't have any decimal, it's not to any decimal point, so I'm just going to leave it at 0. Now, you might ask yourself, hey Af, what's the difference between name and label? Well, the name is what the variable is called in SPSS, and the label is basically anything you want to put in that describes the variable. So you can make this as long or as short as you want, but it's it's helpful to put in something that will make this name variable make sense. So I'm just going to put in age of, say, participant, for instance, and move on. One thing just to note is that these names, SPSS likes it to be like you can't have any special characters in there. You can't have any spaces. So if I went age of part like that, it will say variable name contains an illegal character. So it doesn't. So the idea being that these are meant to be the short, sharp, sweet kind of descriptors of your variable, and the label is meant to be the thing that you can elaborate a little bit more about, that gives you information about the name of the variable, for instance. Values, we'll come into this a bit later, but this is only useful if you are using categorical variables, so I'll mention that a bit more here. So because this is not a categorical variable, we can just leave that as blank. We don't have any missing, but just to show you what that looks like, you can input discrete missing values. So you can, so for instance, let's just say that someone didn't want to give you their age. What is common in sort of SPSS, or what I've seen a lot of people do, is when there isn't sort of data for a particular variable, then a lot of people put in something really random that can't be for age. For instance, -9999. The reason being is that no one can be -9,999 years old. And so if, for instance, you mistakenly put that in, hopefully, you would do a graph and it will come out as a massive weird outlier, and that would be your red flag. So that's just a handy tool to put in, something like that. But the good thing about that is then if you've coded -9999 as your missing value, you can come in here and you can say, actually, everything that is -9999, I want to be a missing value. So instead of just leaving it blank, you can actually code it as a missing value, and that's one way to do it here, and make sure that that's selected. You can also put in a range. So you might say, actually, yeah, we got the ages of everyone, but actually we're only interested in everyone that's below the age of 80, for instance. So you might want to put everyone that is 80 to 100, you might want to put them as missing values. So that's also another option. So actually, I'm just going to keep that in just so you can see. I'll keep this individual as -9, so you can see what that looks like. Columns, you don't really need to worry about that. Alignment is just how the data is going to be aligned in the data view. So again, that's just a personal preference. Don't need to really worry about that. The next big one is measure. And you are presented with three options. You have scale, ordinal, or nominal. Now, generally speaking, variables come in two different categories. Okay, you've got categorical variables, or also known as qualitative variables, and you also have numeric variables, also known as quantitative variables. Now, the numeric variables are all encompassed in what is called in SPSS as scale. Okay, the categorical variables are split between nominal and ordinal. So nominal, and I find these little symbols to be really helpful. So nominal means that you have groups of categories. So if I come back to my example data here, transport, what I've got here is transport would be a nominal variable. Okay, so you've got people taking buses, so they form one group. You've got people taking bicycles, they form another group, and you've got people taking trucks, so they form another group. So they are categories of different modes of transport. And so that's why they would fit underneath the nominal sort of measure here in SPSS. Ordinal is a little bit different. It is similar in the sense that it is a categorical variable, so you can be in different categories, but there is order. So helpful that it's called ordinal, because there is order to your categories. And so an example might be a Likert scale. So you might have taken like a test, not a test, a survey, and people would say, hey, rate your enjoyment of this ice cream that you have been given to eat, for instance. Rate it in a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being I hated it or it was disgusting, 10 being I loved it and it was the best. So ordinal would be the variable that you would go for, because there is order to it, and it also kind of increases in either enjoyment or dislike, if that makes sense. And you can sort of put them in two different or several different categories in an ordered fashion. That being said, they can also sometimes be seen as scale variables as well. So that's the Likert ones become a little bit tricky, and it really does depend on the type of statistical test that you're taking. I'll leave it there for the minute, but for our case, for age, it's a scale variable because it's numeric. Within scale variables, there are what are known as continuous and discrete variables. Discrete variables are whole numeric value kind of variables. So, so for instance, like the number of times someone went to the doctor, okay, in a particular period. You can't really say that they went, 6.5 times to the doctor. They either went 6 times or they went 7 times. So that's what's known as a discrete variable. It's in its own little discrete package. A continuous variable can sort of take any value, within limits, of course, but age would be a sort of continuous variable, because typically speaking, it is a whole number, but you could say that someone is, say, 6.5 years old, for instance, or you could say that they are 6 years, 7 months, 364 days, etc. You get what I mean. Like there's, it's in a continuum. You can sort of make it whatever you want in terms of the variable that you've measured. Anyway, so that's the scale. And look, I'm just going to quickly. So what you can do is you can manually put in the variable. So now we've got the value, the variable field all set up, and you pop over to your data field, and you'll see that now that we've got age set up in our variable view, it's now popped up in our data view. And each row represents a particular data point, if that makes sense. So in my example data, I think I have, oh gosh, how many have I got? I've got 100, say, people that I've surveyed, for instance, maybe. So each row here would be one of those individuals. So you might have seen that the rows here in the variable view are the variables themselves. So you will put the variables down here. And now the rows are the actual individual cases or participants or subjects or whatever you are measuring in your data set. So you can manually enter in the data. You can literally go 28, 35. You can sort of enter it in that way. Or you can copy and paste data in. So here I'm just going to copy in the whole list here, and you can easily just paste it in like that, Control V, however you want to do it. So you can see that that is now matching up with that. And there you go. In a nutshell, that is how you would set up a variable and how you would enter it into SPSS. Anyway, guys, I've rabbited on for way too long, so I hope that was helpful. See you in the next video.